Thank you very much for listening to this final episode of Light of the Vedas. This is your host, Sri Sajinandan Das. We've been discussing the Bhagavad Gita in the past few episodes, talking about the Karma Yoga, or the process of doing one's duties and developing transcendental knowledge simultaneously, becoming detached from the fruits of that work, and moving towards liberation from samsara. We discussed the process of Jnana Yoga, which more or less arises out of Karma Yoga. It's the maturity of Karma Yoga, wherein the transcendental realization is so great that one, in a very honest state of mind, is now qualified to leave aside all karma, all duties within this world, including one's career and one's family, and just focus completely on studying the scriptures and developing spiritual knowledge about the nature of the world and the nature of the absolute truth and the nature of the soul and how they relate to each other, and becoming detached and leaving the world for the realm of transcendence. And then also we discussed Ashtanga Yoga or Dhyana Yoga, the process of meditation, gradually controlling one's relationships and purifying one's physical body, controlling the senses, and then turning inward into controlling the mind, withdrawing the mind from material existence and absorbing in meditation upon the absolute truth, and then finally entering into Samadhi, the highest realization of transcendence. Now, throughout the Bhagavad Gita, there's a constant theme, which is Bhakti Yoga, or devotion to Krishna. Practically in every chapter, Krishna will emphasize the need to worship Him, surrender unto Him, to meditate upon Him, and bow down upon Him, to Him. And there's various different levels of confidentiality in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna refers to this as rahasyam, or as secrets. You know, the Bhagavad Gita, this system of yoga is very secret, and Krishna goes into more and more secret information. He's continually telling Arjuna that I'm going to reveal to you something which is even more intimate than I've revealed before. And so as Krishna gets more and more intimate in the Bhagavad Gita, he becomes more and more personal, and he begins to talk more and more about himself. And you can see that this element of Bhakti Yoga, it pervades the other yogas as well. For example, within the Karma Yoga system, remember, if you've heard that episode, Karma Yoga is basically you're going to do your duties, you're going to do your job. If you're a warrior, you're going to be a warrior. If you're a blacksmith, you'll be a blacksmith. And you'll do these things while becoming detached from the fruits of the work, because you're developing transcendental knowledge. And your understanding of what the absolute truth is will determine your level of transcendental knowledge. A very fundamental level of transcendental knowledge is that it is the divine light. It is the pure light of bliss, the platform of eternity, of which the soul is a spark of the divine fire. And through meditation, one can enter into that realm of light and live there eternally, sort of humming as a ray of light. And that's a very basic understanding of the absolute truth. And if that's your understanding, you meditate upon yourself as light. You are Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi, and you perform your particular duties within the world, gradually becoming purified. Now, that's kind of like, this is considered confidential knowledge, or it's a secret. But an even more deeper secret is when Krishna talks about Parabrahman, or Paramatma within the heart, that element of God, or that aspect of God which is in the heart of all living beings, and within the core of every atom and in between the atoms, and saturates and pervades nature and gives nature its substance and its existence. But then higher than that, there's the ultimate secret, the highest secret. And as Krishna moves through Bhagavad Gita, he gives more and more of this, which is the personality of God. It is God himself in the spiritual world, and it's the source of the other emanations of Brahman. Krishna mentions Brahmano hi pratishtaham, that he, Krishna, is actually the basis of Brahman. Brahman is resting upon him. Ultimately, it's his effulgence. It is the light emanating from God. And so, as the Bhagavad Gita goes forward, there's more and more revelation of the personality of God, of who Krishna is, there on the chariot with Arjuna. And essentially, when one recognizes Krishna as the absolute truth, then one's transcendental knowledge is from that perspective. One sees himself not just as a ray of light, but as a ray of light and a servant of Vishnu or Krishna, an eternal servant, because that is what the soul is. And the soul is an eternal spark of Krishna, but we're separate from Krishna. We're a different personality, and our position is to eternally serve. And in that particular consciousness, that is how one becomes detached from the fruits of their work. Rather than just meditating that you're Brahman, you meditate that I am Brahman and I'm a servant of Krishna. And then the way you become detached is not simply, I don't care, for these things, I'm pure spiritual energy, and this is just matter acting. But rather you see that I'm an eternal servant of Krishna, let me do these things for Krishna. Let me turn these things into a selfless offering unto Him. And so this is the higher level of Karma Yoga or Buddhi Yoga, and it transforms into Bhakti Yoga, where you're detached from all the fruits of your work because you're doing them all for Krishna, as a service to Krishna, as a loving offering to Krishna, with no personal desire to get anything from Krishna. You're doing it just for Krishna's pleasure. And it's not tinged with any selfish desire. Some people go to God and they request, something, a new car, or to pass a test, or to get this particular husband or wife. But real worship is not selfish. You don't want anything from God. You just want to please God and make God happy. And in this way, you enter into the highest realms of your own happiness, wherein the soul sacrifices itself for God. And this is the true nature of the soul. And it is here that one becomes Atma Rati, when one tastes the soul itself. It's sort of like all that happiness and pleasure that we're looking for in the world, it's really just within us. In fact, the example given in the Vedas is like a musk deer. A musk deer has a certain gland sort of within its lower body, within its belly, the bottom of its belly, and it smells, from that gland, this beautiful musk scent is emanating. And so the deer runs, galloping all around the forest looking for that smell. Where's it coming from? He doesn't realize it's coming from himself. And so the soul really can be satisfied only when the soul comes in touch with its true nature. And so by offering everything as a service, a loving devotional offering, with no desire to enjoy anything but giving pleasure to the Supreme Lord in pure selflessness and love, then that actually awakens the soul, and it gives the true satisfaction and happiness that the soul is looking for. And also simultaneously, because you're not acting selfishly with the desire to enjoy the fruits, then automatically there's no more karma as well. And any activity that's not done as a sacrifice ultimately to Vishnu, it causes karma within this world. It causes bondage. So that's true detachment in the light of true transcendental knowledge, because it's the knowledge of who the soul is and what the soul is. And also while doing one's duty, and this is ultimately what Krishna advises Arjuna to do. He tells him to do his duty detached from the fruits of his work with transcendental knowledge. But as time goes on, he makes it very clear that you should do this as an offering to me. Do it for me. And not only that, but anusmada yudhyacha. While you're fighting, you should also remember me. You should absorb your mind in me and think of me. And, become my devotee and worship me. So you turn the performance of your duty into an offering to me. And not only that, but while doing the offering, you have to think of me. And the offering also should be done according to the rules that come from me, right, in the scriptures. So in this way, everything merges into me and becomes, non-different from me, and you become completely spiritualized and purified in that association. And just as the other different forms of yoga, they start out on a certain level and gradually one becomes more and more purified. So similarly, within Bhakti Yoga, it's the same thing. Krishna describes that on a fundamental level, you're going to offer him the fruits of your work. You're going to offer him the fruits of your nature, how you act in the world. But on another level, there is worship. There's actual spiritual practices, such as worshiping the deity within temples. There's different... There's a kind of, you take the true spiritual nature of the soul, how the soul acts in the spiritual world, the activities that the soul will perform in a liberated state, and you bring them down into this world, and then you begin practicing them. For example, What are the various things that a priest or a servant of God will do within the temple, the various rituals that are performed? These are the same types of things that are done by souls in the spiritual world and the purified state. And yet we can do them here in our conditioned illusion state. We perform those same activities, and we do them in a regulated way, and gradually that jogs the memory of the soul, because the soul ultimately comes from that spiritual realm, and that the truth of your relationship with God is locked within you, and it's lost and forgotten. You're like an amnesiac, but by performing these same spiritual activities of the spiritual world, of the soul in a liberated condition, your remembrance is gradually jogged, and more you begin to remember who you are, right? And this manifests as a desire to attain God. It's like instead of lusting after the world, you lust after God, not in a selfish way, but you want to surrender more and more and more, and you want to deepen your relationship more and more and more. And that intense greed, then it manifests as a constant remembrance of God. And just as we've mentioned in the previous episodes discussing the systems of yoga, the essence of all yoga is to put the mind on the absolute truth and to hold it there and to keep it there. And for the Bhakti yogi, then he or she will place their mind upon God, and they're so absorbed in God in devotion and love and constantly thinking of God. And this is when you get great saints, and persons in, say, for example, in the Catholic tradition or Christian tradition, you have people like Saint Francis. And India, of course, is filled with so many saints: Ramanuja, Madhva, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There's so many individuals who embody this quality of the highest expressions of bhakti, and then you'll see that God will act wonderfully in their life. And of course, not everyone is qualified to understand God on a personal level, as he is as an individual in the spiritual world. And therefore, much of the Bhagavad Gita, it actually emphasizes how to see God within the world. These are called his vibhutis, or opulences. Essentially, we find ourselves attracted to the world and absorbed in the world because God is present within the world. He's saturating with it. It's all based upon him. And all the various things that we see and are attracted to are basically just small little pieces of his glories and his opulence. For example, you might see a beautiful woman or a beautiful man, and you're drawn to them, you're attracted to them, you're fascinated. Or someone who's very intelligent, someone who's very powerful, someone who's very strong, somebody who's very famous. Obviously, people love to hear about famous people, celebrities and things like that. Why are they attractive? Well, maybe they're beautiful, or maybe because they're famous. But these various things which we find attractive, the reason we're attracted to them is because the soul is naturally attracted to God, and those individuals are exhibiting a higher amount of the qualities of God than usual. It's kind of like they're shining out an opulence of God, and it's really just one little tiny drop of a drop, and yet we find it, we can't look away. It's so beautiful. It draws us in, it attracts us. In fact, that's what Krishna means. It means the all-attractive. So if you were to take, that most beautiful thing you see in the world and you're attracted to it, if you go to the very reservoir of attractiveness, from which the entire world itself is merely a drop, then you'll be incredibly attracted. You'll be so drawn to it from the very foundation of your soul that you are absorbed with all of your being and all of your devotion to it. And so, but, that's a very high level, of course, to see the source of all beauty and the source of all strength, the source of all opulence, and be attracted to it. Therefore, Krishna advises that people see the various opulences of this world and then understand and connect them to him. So that when you're dealing with the world and sort of interacting with the world, you could see God within the world. And this is normal, for most normal people, or you might say just people living normal lives. This is an important practice, right? To try to see God within the world. If you go to the beach and you walk on the beach or something, and you see a beautiful sunset, rather than just think it's a beautiful sunset, you can think, wow, it's this beauty is coming from God. Or you see the beauty and the power, the majesty, the danger even of the ocean. You could think, this power is coming from God. That feeling that you get is because you're interacting with one of God's opulences, his powers. And so in the Bhagavad Gita and in multiple places, Krishna lists various opulences, various aspects of the world which really embody his majesty and his power and his beauty and his glory, in which you can remember him by and see these things as part and parcel of his glories. And then at a certain point, Arjuna asks, all of these glories, you've said they're emanating from one little spark of your glory. In other words, all the glories of the universe, it's just one little drop of Krishna's glory. I want to see that drop. I want to see how it's shown within the world. This is like a stained glass window. It's a very beautiful thing, but it's just simply glass. If you look at a stained glass window at nighttime, it doesn't look like much, right? But as soon as the sun is shining through it, it becomes illuminated. It becomes beautiful. That little ball of light of the sun is there behind the glass and shining, giving it life, giving it form and shape and brilliance. And so in the same way, the universe, it's illuminated by God. It's God's presence within the universe which actually makes it beautiful and gives it life. And so Arjuna asks, show me this. Show me this spark of light which is illuminating the universe. I want to see it. And so then Krishna shows him the Virat Rupa, or the universal form. This is very famous. It's perhaps one of the most famous parts of the Bhagavad Gita, is this incredible majestic form which only Arjuna can see on the battlefield and on the chariot that they're sitting upon, as well as a few other individuals within the universe. And basically this form is a vision of everything that Arjuna wants to see within the universe. There's kind of two different stages of it. There's the Virat Rupa, which shows all the various, whatever Arjuna desires to see, he'll see it. And then there is the Kala Rupa, or the form of time. And it's more of a destructive feature. It shows Krishna's power in the form of time as it's destroying, especially everyone on the battlefield, all the individuals who are there and who will die. It's ultimately by the will of Krishna, or the will of God, and therefore that powerful, destructive, fierce form is exhibited. And it's got many thousands of eyes and thousands of heads and arms and legs and fang-like teeth, and there's flames everywhere, and it's burning the whole universe, and different sages and demigods are praying, all peace, shanti, shanti, shanti. And it's this overwhelming vision that Arjuna has to pray for it to be removed. And in fact, it's that form that then Robert Oppenheimer famously quoted, Kalos me, when he first saw the nuclear bomb explode, right? The first test of the nuclear bomb he created, he quoted Krishna, time I am, the destroyer, I've come to destroy the worlds. And so that's where that happens within the Bhagavad Gita. And so then Arjuna asks, please, take away this terrifying form and show me your four-handed form, which is the form of Vishnu, and then show me your Saumya Vapu, or your most beautiful form, which is the two-handed form of Krishna. And the two-handed form of Krishna, where he appears just like a normal human being, then all of the gods and all of the rishis, everybody wants to see this form. And therefore, when Krishna shows it, all these celestial beings gather around, and it's considered extremely beautiful and extremely sweet. And at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, then the narrator, Sanjay, who's actually narrating the whole situation, the whole experience, or rather the whole conversation on the chariot, he's narrating it to the king Dhritarashtra. He remembers this form, and he becomes filled with ecstasy again and again, and his hairs are standing on end, remembering this. So this is an extremely powerful experience in the midst of the Bhagavad Gita, and Krishna is really showing that he is God, and he's establishing that he is factually God. It's not just some mystic yogi, or it's not just someone giving their opinion, or something like that. He's actually demonstrated to the world this incredible form. And Arjuna offers him prayers with folded hands, glorifying him as the Supreme Lord. And he declares also earlier, Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Pavitram, Paramam Bhavam. You are the Supreme Brahman. You're the Supreme Pure. You're the Absolute Truth. And all the great sages, such as Narada, Asata, Devala, Vyas, who we've spoken about, they all declare the same truth about you. And so he really attests to the divinity of Krishna. But the purpose of all this is to provoke remembrance. Either one remembers and absorbs the mind in the spiritual form of Krishna and his activities in the spiritual world, or one absorb their mind in the beauty of Krishna as he manifests it through the world. Well, one spiritual principle given by Krishna is the more that you think of him in the way that you think of him. And the more that you think of him, the more he thinks of you. And the individual that's completely absorbed in God, in devotion, then God is completely absorbed in him or her, and totally, showering down that mercy upon them. And then this element of mercy is very important for the Bhakti Yogi. In any yoga path, there's that mercy of the divine must be there. It's an essential factor. But for the Bhakti Yogi, it relies fully upon that mercy. And by Krishna's mercy, then the individual makes advancement in spiritual elevation. Their senses are controlled, and by the process of surrender, then Krishna protects them. Kind of like they're fully within the hand of Krishna or Vishnu or God, and then the more they rely on his mercy and the more they worship and completely absorb themselves and become helpless in his hand, the more he actually takes control of their life and protects them and gives them spiritual power, bala, in order to resist lust and resist the various temptations. So anytime you see like a saintly person who's actually beyond material temptation and is an exalted consciousness, they achieve that not so much by, rigorously meditating every day and developing that capacity, but by surrendering and having it given to them in reciprocation for their surrender. And so this is really at the heart of Bhakti Yoga. And this is very confidential. These sort of things are quite considered secret. And yet Krishna mentions in a couple places the same instructions, Manmana bhavamad bhakta madhyajimam namaskadu, that one has to put their mind upon him. This is really the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. In fact, it's the central point of the Bhagavad Gita. And at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna concludes the Bhagavad Gita, or you might say the climax of the Bhagavad Gita is again the repetition of this instruction. And Krishna urges people to really surrender to this instruction and even to leave aside all the other forms of yoga and leave aside all the other types of consideration and simply surrender to him. So Manmana means to put your mind upon Krishna, to constantly think of him. It's like we're talking about the Srimad Bhagavatam, is a way in which people absorb their mind through discussion upon the activities of Krishna or Vishnu, the various incarnations of God. And so one should constantly think of God, or in the name of God. The Maha Mantra, which is specifically emphasized for the age of Kali, is Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. And there's a great science to chanting mantras like this in the names of God. And by chanting these mantras attentively with full devotion and in a surrendered state, then the one has deep and incredible realization about these names, and it becomes the very source of spiritual perfection itself. And so one absorbs the mind ultimately in Krishna, Mad Bhakta. One has to become the devotee of Krishna. One has to surrender to Krishna and worship him. Mam Namaskuru, one has to offer obeisances to Krishna. Manmyaji, one has to worship Krishna. So in this way, Krishna advises individuals to become his devotee. And one of the most famous verses of the Bhagavad Gita, Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja. Krishna says that you have to essentially surrender everything, surrender all other considerations, all other practices, all other systems of yoga, all other beliefs, and just surrender and become his devotee and trust him, Ma Shuchaha. As you remember, Arjuna has all of these doubts, and he's fearful of sinful reactions, etc. So Krishna tells him, just surrender unto me, and I'll take care of you. If you just surrender to me, then everything else will be, I'll make sure that everything else happens perfectly fine for you. You'll be perfectly protected, and all of your desires will be fulfilled, and you'll find that it was the best path that you could take. And so you have to surrender, having full faith in Krishna. And then ultimately you enter into the stage of constant remembrance, just like these yogis, that the Ashtanga yogis and the Jnana yogis, they enter into a stage of meditation where they're constantly absorbed in the Supreme. So the Bhakti yogi also enters into a state where they're constantly absorbed in the Supreme. And they may even, similar to these other yogis, they may retire more from active life and absorb themselves in what's called bhajan, or private worship, in which their mind is absorbed in trance, and maybe they even have revelations of God in the spiritual world, and they're absorbed in spiritual ecstasy. Or they may go out into the world and try to help people and assist people and give them spiritual knowledge as well. And so this is really the essence of Bhagavad Gita, is surrender to Krishna, and particularly through the process of Bhakti Yoga. And Krishna mentions that the deeper truths of Bhagavad Gita, this confidential knowledge of surrender, it really shouldn't be explained to individuals who are not bhaktas, because they can't understand. And individuals who are not engaged in devotional service, because you simply don't have the pre-qualification to understand God's personality. Nor should they be not austere, like they have to be individuals who are following principles of religion, individuals who are pious and following regulations of proper and improper behavior. And they have to be non-envious. They have to be non-envious of Krishna, meaning that they have to be willing to accept Krishna as God and accept God's position beyond that of the soul, that you're in an inferior position eternally, and you have to be non-envious in the sense that you're not trying to compete with God, but rather you're satisfied that God is God, and you want God to be God, and you want to glorify God and worship God for His pleasure and serve selflessly, and then God will reciprocate with you. But if you're envious of God, meaning you're trying to take the position of the enjoyer, ultimately the enjoyer of this world, which is really the condition that we're all in, then practically speaking, we're not qualified to enter into the deeper subject matters of the Bhagavad Gita. So there's quite a high qualification to actually interact with or understand God in a personal level. But nevertheless, even if one doesn't have these qualifications, Krishna mentions that simply if you're pious, if you're just not a bad person, you're inherently a good person, and you hear these same subject matters, just as we've been discussing, with faith, meaning you believe in it to a certain degree, and without envy, you don't have a problem with God being God, and you're not trying to compete with Him, rather you accept that, there is a God, and He's in a superior position, and He's the true enjoyer. I'm not really the enjoyer. And you just have this kind of right mindset, then even though you may not be a devotee of God, or you may not be absorbed in the path of Bhakti Yoga, still you become purified, and ultimately you become elevated to the heavenly planets, which is the heavenly realms of enjoyment. But if you study the same Bhagavad Gita, and you have this same sort of confidential understanding of Bhakti Yoga, then you're not elevated to the heavenly planets, rather you're elevated into the spiritual world to associate with and serve Krishna eternally. So having said that, it's important to, if one wants to understand Bhagavad Gita, which again is the gateway to the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is really the light which illuminates the Vedas. If you study the Bhagavad Gita very carefully, and you understand all the yoga systems and how they relate to each other, and you understand the preeminent position of Bhakti Yoga, and the position of Krishna as the Supreme Lord who exists beyond material existence, and you understand your nature as a soul, being an eternal servant of God, and the nature of the material energy, and how we see it in illusion. And you understand how all these things relate to each other, as well as you understand the various systems of religion within the world and spiritual practice, and you see everything within its proper order. Then you can enter into studying Srimad Bhagavatam, and you can gradually go deeper and deeper and deeper into understanding the personality of God, and what He's like, what His qualities are, what His activities are. And just by that process of understanding that, and Krishna Himself mentions, Janma Karma Chame Divyam, Evam Yoveti Tattvataha, if you understand those activities in truth, like you understand them in the light of the understanding of who Krishna really is, and you see Krishna properly with the proper understanding of His position, and then you study and understand His qualities and activities and of the avatars, then that leads to liberation. You won't take birth again within the world. It's such a powerful force. And then studying that Bhagavatam, one will enter in, through the beginning, the basics, and then moving more and more, deeper and deeper into the higher levels of the literature until you get to the 10th canto, which is the beautiful smiling face of Krishna, which really shows his personality in the most intimate way. And so this is the highest thing that the Vedas have to offer. And then if you understand this and see this very clearly, it becomes a light that then shines down upon the rest of the Vedas. And you can see the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Atharva Veda, the Sama Veda. You could see all the various Upanishads in their proper perspective. And so I would certainly recommend this if that's something you're interested in. But you have to hear the Bhagavad Gita from a proper source, which the proper source has to be in Parampara. Krishna himself also describes this in the Bhagavad Gita, evam parampara praptam imam rajashayo viduhu. Like you have to actually approach the Bhagavad Gita through the guru-disciple relationship. And it has to be a bona fide guru who is actually presenting the Bhagavad Gita as it actually is, how Krishna actually wants it, or what Krishna truly desires and is expressing in the text, rather than from individuals who have their own particular motivation or their own particular angle that they want to utilize the Bhagavad Gita to express their opinion. You have to take the Bhagavad Gita in the way that Krishna himself has said it, and from Krishna's perspective, and fulfilling Krishna's desires. And Krishna expressed his desire very clearly, that sarva dharman prityaja, you surrender unto me, and you worship me, you absorb yourself in me, and you become my devotee. And so this is really the true perspective to see and understand what Krishna means when he's speaking of these various things in Bhagavad Gita. And so if you're interested in that, then one particular book I would recommend is Bhagavad Gita As It Is by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. He's a very powerful acharya within the Gaudiya Vaishnav tradition of India. And he presents the Bhagavad Gita very beautifully with the Sanskrit, the original Devanagari, then a word-for-word translation, then the actual, like a poetic English translation, and then finally a purport which explains each particular verse. So it's a very beautiful book and a very powerful book that could change your life. So if you're interested in entering into an understanding of the Vedas from the Bhakti tradition, then I would recommend that particular book. So thank you very much for listening. It's been an honor and a privilege to present this podcast, Light of the Vedas. I hope that I was able to convey the tremendous beauty of the Vedic literature and kind of like the complexity of it all and the systematic way that it approaches spiritual life. And I hope that it was something that you found valuable. And I'm very honored and grateful that you've taken the time to listen to me. So thank you very much.